Welcome everyone to the Win Now podcast, hosted by Deborah Byrd, founder and CEO of Plug and Play SM.
I am so excited for today's show, so let's go.
And then myself, Todd Bookspan, founder of Win by Noon. Welcome everyone to another episode of the Win Now podcast. I'm your host, Todd Bookspan, and I am always so excited to be here and be with my co-host, Deborah Byrd, the CEO and founder of Plug and Play SM. Welcome, Deborah.
Hello, how are you?
You know, I'm doing awesome. I'm broadcasting live, although it looks like I'm standing in front of my desk. For those who are watching this on video, I'm actually in California where it's only 60 degrees.
So fun fact, Todd he originally lives in, or most of the year is in Arizona, which is like an oven. So he goes to California for, is it usually 9 or 10 weeks? This is your second year to do this?
It's our second year. We always escape in the summer, right? During COVID, it was an Airstream. So who knew where we were going to be? But we've done this almost every year for maybe 7-8 years.
Wow.
A lot of fun. All right. So why don't you introduce our guest, Deborah? Let's get this party started.
Okay, so I am super excited of today's guest. I actually found Melanie. So it's Melanie Deziel, just like the fuel. And I was actually on Amazon searching for obviously content marketing books and had just recently taken the Exactly What to Say certification course with Phil Jones. And I found out that they had a book together. And I was like, I don't know if my world could get any better. So not only is she an author of best-selling books, I know you also were the first editor, I believe, for branded content at the New York Times. You have written, pieces that have gotten multiple awards. Founding member of the HuffPost Partner Studio, served as a director of creative strategy at Time, where you built, content strategy and brands over 35 plus U.S. media properties, including Time, Fortune, People, Sports Illustrated, and Entertainment Weekly. You have worked as an adjunct professor for Syracuse University's Newhouse School of Public Communications, taught different graduate courses in digital marketing, social media. You're a speaker, you're an award-winning content creator, a lifelong storyteller. You have a podcast, and you've recently created a membership for creators called Creator Kitchen, if I'm not mistaken. But welcome, Melanie. That was a long intro.
It was. It's good. It's really exciting to be here, and I'm excited for us to chat more today.
Yay. Well, the fact that you're just a lifelong content creator and storyteller, I thought, this would be the perfect audience to have you on, as we typically serve real estate agents, loan officers, and some of the other, entrepreneurs in this space who really struggle with having a strategy of how to consistently create content with the mix of their day job, right? Like they are, wearing 18 different hats. And so they get kind of content blocks, so to speak. So, what would be the best starting point for those who are tuning in who could relate to that, story of just, man, I got to create a piece of content every day. And how do I mix this in? So, the time aspect, how would you help?
Yeah, you're totally right. I think that's one of the big challenges these days is like you have to do your actual job that you love, that you got into this industry to do. And then you also have to be a content creator and sort of market yourself. So it can be really stressful. So the first thing, just like to get everybody on the same page, absolve you of guilt. You do not have to be everywhere. You do not have to post everything all of the time. Most of the time when we're comparing ourselves to folks we see in the industry who may be posting, on 6 different platforms, 2-3 times a day, they're not doing it themselves. They have a team or a virtual assistant or an intern or whatever. So make sure you're only comparing yourself to a single human and not a human with a whole support team. It's very easy to get kind of frustrated and think something's wrong with you, but you're really just comparing yourselves to multiple people. The other thing I would say is that it's so easy for us to think we have to create moments to create content, but truly what we can do is actually just capture the moments that are already happening in our lives every single day. So you think of the various things you do throughout the day as you're getting ready for work, you're talking on the phone, you're preparing materials, like whatever it is that you're doing, there's probably something that you can mine for content in those different places. I always say if an email takes you more than 5 minutes to answer, there's a good chance that there's a piece of content hidden in there, right? As long as it's not super specific. If it's a question that many people might have, you're answering, it's a good chance that there's content there. So rather than thinking about content creation as like this separate job on top of your job, try to think of it as something that you can capture throughout the day while you're doing what it is that you love.
Well, and just to piggyback on that, and then sorry, Todd, I mean, I could ask her questions all day if you'd let me, but to piggyback on that, I feel like when I'm speaking to clients, and I run a social media marketing company that is just for loan officers. And I have a lot of people during our initial calls that are like, is it too late? Or there's already so much noise. Like, there's only so many different ways you could differentiate the loan process. Like, I don't even have a TikTok account or an Instagram account. Do I really need to be on social media and quote, have a brand? I mean, my company has a website. So kind of speaking to those who may be feeling it's too late and is it really necessary?
So I would be lying if I said it is necessary for every person out there. I think there are some folks who, if you have a steady stream of clients, you have as many clients as you want and more, and they're coming from other places, and you feel secure that that pipeline is going to continue to be that pipeline for the foreseeable future. Don't bend over backwards and uproot your whole day to try to learn the latest TikTok dance. But what I do think is that for most of us, there's opportunity there that we're not capturing. And so what we want to be doing is figuring out strategically, where can I spend the right effort, like not over the top, not taking all day long, right? But to make a difference. And so the question of where do I need to be, or do I need to be there, is really, where is your audience and do you want to be there? That's the real question. So that's what I'd be asking, is just trying to figure out, where does your audience hang out? Where are they online? And is it possible for you to have sort of a natural presence there? I don't know of any loan officers who are killing it on TikTok. I'm not sure that that's the target audience for most of us. But I do know that, like, there are folks who are killing it on taxes. Like, there's a guy who's got millions of followers talking about taxes on TikTok. So it's not all just silly dances and pranks. Like, you can actually be educational. And if that lights your fire, if you love teaching people about your business, then, that could be an opportunity for you.
Well, I think education is so important in, mortgage and real estate. And, I love the whole concept, right? I listen to prove it, right? I'm a better listener than I am a reader. And, you talk about the fact that you've got to, you're on trial, you've got to prove who you are. So I think education is a great way to do it. So could you talk to that for a moment?
100%. So in many cases, like, our businesses that we're in are very, very relationship based, right? Like, we're building relationships with clients and hopefully serving them in the long term. And that means that in order for that to happen, they've got to trust us. And trust is something that has never been more important than it is right now in the space. Like, consumer skepticism is at an all-time high across all industries, across all purchase decisions, right? So if we want them to trust us, and we know that it's harder than ever to earn that trust, we've got to put a little bit of effort in. And you're right, educational content is one of the best ways to show that you know what you're talking about, right? If you're coming in and teaching your audience something, then of course, naturally, you know more about this topic than they do. You know your stuff. And so educational content, not only is it hopefully easy for you to create because you already have it all in your head, you're just getting it down on paper or recording it. But it shows the audience that, number one, you know your stuff, and number two, you're here to serve. You're someone that they can count on to provide, help fill knowledge gaps, right? Help them understand things that might be too complex or intimidating, and kind of help them along in that process. So educational content, I think, we can consider it low hanging fruit, like just sharing all the awesome stuff you know.
Well, and just to put this into application mode, I kind of put the squeeze on my clients. I shouldn't say kind of, I definitely put the squeeze on them each week, that when they are creating video or creating their content, I ironically would say, you have to prove it. You can't just be another talking head talking about, interest
Yes.
rates and recession. Like, show me the data, put that graphic up, because people will trust and believe the data as long as the source is credible. But if you're just
Right.
another talking head adding to the noise of what's already, kind of, it's not like we lack information on the internet, then this is a way you can put the ball in play and use the things like prove it, like what your book
Yeah.
talks about, as evidence, that don't just take my word for it, because I've never heard a single loan officer or real estate agent, for that matter, ever say it's not a good time to buy, right? So it's like, you are still seen as a salesperson at the end of the day. So like,
Yeah.
how could you supply the graphs and the charts of like proving the fact that your advice makes a difference? So
Yeah.
that's what I
100%. And that's what we talk about as corroboration in the book that you mentioned, Improve It. That sometimes having other people's opinions to back you up is just what you need to kind of break that veneer of like, I'm a salesperson, or, you can just trust what I'm saying, exactly as you said to your clients, having, whether it's a study or another person or, some sort of news article that you can show, like just having someone else say the same thing as you goes a long way toward giving credibility to whatever it is that you're sharing.
Now, what do you say for those who, the term influencer, or those, content creators where we compare ourselves naturally? Like, we don't all start from the same starting line, and some have
Right.
bought their followers, they buy their likes, they buy their comments. And so what about the little bit of personal development or just confidence of those who they have all the content in the world? It's not that they lack the content.
Yeah.
It's just, man, I hate the way I look and sound on camera. Do I really have to go get, photos done or get my makeup and hair done? That just seems like a lot of work. I'll just keep doing what I'm doing, even though those who are in mortgage and real estate right now, just so you know, there is a lot of bleeding going on. They could all use more business.
Yeah.
Talk to that of just getting comfortable and kind of your
Yeah.
language of content I've heard you speak about before to
Yeah.
help those who are listening.
So exactly as you said, I like to say everyone has a first content language. It's like the place where you're most native and you're most comfortable, right? Just like if you were learning a second language. So trying to identify where you do feel comfortable. Like if being on video makes you deeply uncomfortable and you hate it, it's probably going to read in your face, in your voice, in your content, right? So you have then two options: to either practice until you are comfortable, right? Just get those reps in, or to say, well, maybe video isn't the best way. Maybe I could communicate more effectively just over audio. Maybe I can communicate more effectively through photos of my properties and really well written captions. Like you can kind of identify where is it that you feel most comfortable communicating and adapt your content strategy to fit that. The other thing you can do is it doesn't have to necessarily be all you. There's plenty of ways to make video, for example, that don't involve you being on camera. You could just be taking people on tours. You can do perspectives. You could do things like, hyperlapse, or, those time lapse photos over time of you like moving around your office being busy. That doesn't involve having to like put on your newscaster face and voice and feel like you're performing. So it is a little bit of a balance, but I would say that this is one of those things that the more you do it, the more comfortable you will get. And everybody that you're comparing themselves to has a whole bunch of early content that you can't see anymore because they had to learn to get good at it too. So, don't compare your final chapter to your first page to somebody else's final chapter.
Well, that's why I come on here. Deborah's always polished and she's really articulate, and I'm not. So therefore, everyone should feel really comfortable when they hear me speak.
You are full of it.
Well, and it's there's something to be said for that too. I know a lot of my contemporaries in the space, they do have like beautiful backdrops and they get very done up, and that makes them feel so confident. And I'm so glad that they're able to do that and feel powerful. For me, I felt a tremendous amount of pressure that like if I show up done up like that one time, like game over. I can never show my true face again. So I try to be a little bit more downplayed, because for me, I do feel most comfortable when I'm not all done up like that, right? So I had to get comfortable with being on camera without a full face of makeup, without having, my hair fully blown out. Would I love those things? Sure. But that's a lot of pressure when you're doing this stuff all the time, right? So it is about finding what works for you and what's comfortable for you. Because like I said, if you hate it, if it makes you miserable, you're not going to do it. So if you want to do it, figure out how to do it without being miserable.
Love it. Love it. And so, one of the concepts of prove it is that, everyone we talked about it, everyone in the real estate world always says now's the right time to buy. Every loan officer thinks that they're the most financially literate loan officer out there. What are some ideas that you could recommend for someone who wants to prove that they are as smart as they think they are?
So we talked about that educational content. I think that is some of the best stuff out there. Finding ways to showcase what you do know. But I do think that you can actually showcase this with demonstration as well. So looking at stories, for example, of your past clients, insofar as you want to share those things or you're able to share those things, telling stories of success from the past is another good way to do it. I think again, we have this sort of everyone's saying these things. So the perspective shift we want to think about is, how can I show it? How can I let the audience see it with their own eyes, or hear it with their own ears, or experience it themselves, so that I don't actually have to convince them. I can just show them, right? And that's going to look different depending on what your day-to-day looks like, and how comfortable or even legally allowed you may be to share past stories. But finding a way to talk about your success in the past is a really good way to show, like, I've done this before. This is not my first rodeo.
Well, and I think the challenge, if I'm just being completely frank with some, is they've learned the art and mastery of some of the scripting on the front end that works for
Yeah.
sales. Like, oh, we're the loan officer who's there for you for life, and every year we're going to check in and we're going to do an annual review. And so what the good and bad with this is, it could be exposing that, you know what, I say these things but I'm not actually doing them. I say them and they work, and they sound, it creates trust and security for people once someone's referred a deal over. But now I'm starting to realize, when I'm going back to the office and looking for evidence, that I may not be doing the things that I
Yeah.
say that I do. And so it's a little uh it can be
Can
gut wrenching, but it's good
it
to
it
also
can.
explore.
It's true. Yeah. And what I say is, it's so much better for you to discover that than for your clients or your competition or your prospects, right? If you have the gift of discovering that there's a gap between the expectation that you're setting and what you're delivering, that is an incredible opportunity to either decide that I'm going to raise the standard that I'm delivering on, or I'm going to adjust my claims to more accurately reflect what's truly special. Because you have those clients, you're closing that business, you clearly know what you're doing. Maybe you're just trying to make the same promises that others are, and that's not where your sweet spot is, right? Maybe it's that you're super understanding and patient and caring, and you're going to walk people through it and make them feel secure and safe in the process. Not necessarily that you're going to send them a birthday card 3 years later, right? But if that is the kind of claim that you're making, that you're going to be in contact with these folks in the long haul, that is something that hopefully you have those relationships that you can call on to say, hey, this is my second generation of this family that I've helped. Or, hey, when we started this, this person was just a baby, and now, like, here's their graduation in high school that I'm attending, or something like that, right? You can find those proof points that show, like, you stick around and you've been around.
What are your thoughts on the just brand reputation, and even just protecting your own reputation? Where I recently met with two different loan officers. One was the head of a team and they do a lot
Mhm.
of production, and then one was more of an individual loan officer, and they both knew how to sell against each other. So, in my thought was, how do you protect your reputation for when your competitor doesn't say nice things about either your process, whether it's true or not? But people can say what they want, and if I'm a consumer and I go to do my research, like most people do, and there's no social proof or evidence for me to latch on to possibly a different story. I mean, do you think there's a strategy in just protecting your reputation by having kind of that transparency of a resume online? And, would you speak to that a little
Yeah,
bit?
100%. So, the phrase, like, bring the receipts. I always like
Mm,
to say, when you're putting out the proof, like, you are bringing the receipts. So if someone wants to accuse you of shoplifting, accuse you of something, like, you've got the receipts. You can say, I know they say that I don't have these long-standing relationships, but look at my blog. I've been working with this person for 12 years, this person for 8 years, this person for 15 years. Like, you can point to those things and you have proof. And then what you have is, a he said, but she proved situation, right? Like, that person is saying things, but all the evidence points to the opposite. So it is a little bit of an insurance policy, against perhaps, like, someone trying to bring down your reputation. But the other thing is, like you said, folks are going to do their research. And so when they're doing that research and they're seeing that you have this proof of the whatever value it is that you're providing, it says a lot more to the consumer about the other person than it does about you, right? Because if someone else is saying horrible things about you, and they're going to your website, going to your social presence, and not finding the opposite, now that first person looks bad, right? Because they were clearly lying. I see the evidence with my own eyes. I hear it with my own ears. So it's not only like insurance, but it actually kind of, like, shifts the power back in your favor.
like that.
I love that idea of shifting the power back in your favor. And so, as you're talking about showing the receipts, I think that's such a great example. If somebody hasn't built that past history on social, where would you recommend they start?
So the first thing you want to do is do an audit of the claims that you're making in the first place. In many cases, as we've said, folks may be trying to sell on legacy, on experience, but that may not actually be the promise that you're making, and it may not be the promise you should be making. So take a look at all of your materials, your website, your printed materials, your signage, whatever, your direct mail, whatever it is that you're using, and look for those claims. What promises, guarantees, what expectations am I setting? How am I describing my work and my company and myself? Those adjectives are a really good indication. If you're calling your team friendly, like that's a claim, right? I better get some friendly team members when I work with your team. So look for those claims, because that will give you a really good place to say, okay, these are all the claims that I'm making. I know for myself that these are the most important, or these are the three that people tell me I worked with you because, right? So identify those top claims that are most important to you, your business, your audience, and work on creating proof for those specific claims. So you first just want to get that lay of the land, see what you're saying, and then determine which ones are most important for your audience to believe.
Love that. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the art of, we all want to create value on social or in our emails, but I find that it's challenging for most to recognize or even know where to look, perhaps. So maybe you could fill in these blanks of, how do we determine what our target audience actually perceives as value for them? Because a lot of times we show up and throw up and we talk about the things we want to talk about, or our content ends up being all about me, why now, and not enough about maybe the social listening or the getting into the headspace of your ideal client. So what do you suggest for people in order to do that? Do you have some strategies or tips so that we can truly know whether our content is valuable? Because I personally don't believe just the number of likes or comments is enough to determine if someone found it valuable or if it actually made an impact for them to take action in some other way.
Right. So a couple of things you could look at. If this content is on your website, you can use your analytics to see, what are people going from one to another post? Where are they going to just before they decide to book a call or join your list or whatever else? You can use those analytics to see which content is preceding them taking the desired action. And that's going to be a good chance that that stuff was enough to close the deal. So take a look at that if you have it on your website. But honestly, the easiest way to do this, and it's going to sound so backward in this like tech age that we live in, is to talk to your customers. And I mean, we do that all the time, but truly to ask them, like, what were the things that you were nervous about when you started this journey? What kind of stuff did you look for? When you looked me up, what kind of keywords were you using to look me up? How did you find me? You can just talk to them and they will give you the best answer, because, one thing I try to be really cautious about is like prescribing for folks. And you guys worked with Phil, so he always says, right, prescription before examination is malpractice. So I feel really strongly that if you're getting data from, the competition, you're looking at which of their posts get the most likes. That's what worked for their audience, for that piece of content on that day at that time from them. Right. It's not necessarily going to port over to what you're doing. So talking to your own audience and understanding what they want, what they need, what their questions are, is going to be the absolute best source of information. And I think an underrated tactic, honestly, on social media is to just ask. Like, of course, we want to talk to our current customers, like build those relationships that we have, but honestly saying like, hey, what questions do you all have? Or what was the biggest myth that you used to believe about the industry? Or what was the biggest surprise when you went through this for the first time, right? Like just try to figure out where those knowledge gaps are for them by asking. People love to talk about themselves. They'll be more than happy to share all the things they knew, they wish they knew, they tried before. So asking them straight up, and then you have built-in demand for that content before you even start creating it.
All right. You all have no problem talking. So you all can ask these questions. Like, this is an easy action plan when you get done. Is the next client that you talk to, or if you have no client calls scheduled for today, just pick up the phone and call your most recent client or two and ask them these questions. I think that's great advice.
100%.
Well, and to add to that, the social listening of just, what Facebook groups are you a part of? And what are some of the questions that your target audience, whether that's a real estate agent or a partner of yours, or even the end user as the client, like what are the things that they are asking in those groups that could then easily be turned into content? And it could literally be as simple as you showing, oh, I just recently saw this question in a group that I'm in. So I thought I would go live, or I thought I would jump on here and share, since there could be more of you that may be asking the same question. I mean, that's how simple it can be. I think we make it too difficult in our head, thinking everything has to be perfect and I have to have the perfect editor and lighting and, microphone and whatnot. But it, like you said, just being the content and not thinking of it as I have to create. I think that's where we've got to just make the plan. So hopefully everyone's using their win by noon planner to create that action plan so that you have time to not only create or consume content, but then it's putting in action and distributing it. So now I've heard you say before that there is no such thing as good content. What does that mean?
That's coming back to the point I just made earlier about your competition, right? There is no such thing as good content. I would say there's probably some objectively bad content, but what is good depends entirely on the context. So to take it out of industry for a minute, like go back to our real lives, a good meal when you're in the middle of a road trip, like that bar is pretty low. Like, did it come from a gas station? No. Okay, that's a good meal on a road trip, right? The good meal when you're taking out a client that you're trying to win and it's your best client you've ever had, it better not be that just above gas station meal. I don't think that's going to impress, right? The best meal when you've got 3 toddlers with you, you're babysitting or something, like it better be chicken nuggets and nothing else, or else it's not a good meal, right? So I think we kind of can, as you said, get hung up on there being like a right way to do content. There's only one type of thing that works on TikTok, right? If I'm not dancing, it won't work on TikTok. If I'm not in a bikini, it's not going to work on Instagram. Like, we can get really hung up on thinking that there's one right way to do all of these things, when really it just depends on the context, and what our audience is looking for in these places is going to be different. And our local area and the area we serve is going to impact the content we create. Todd, you're in the Arizona market, like the kind of references you might make to sporting events or news or anything that's happening around, like that's going to be different than someone in another market, right? So these kinds of things can really make it more personal, and also make it so that what's good for one of you may not be what's good or best for the other. And so that's why it's so important. Take your cues from your competition, see it as inspiration for things to explore. But what someone else is doing is very rarely a copy paste good idea for you to do as well.
Well, and that
That
story
kind
was
of bit.
gold about restaurants, right? Think about, I mean, when you are all making your content, I mean, that was like head blown. I loved it, except for the chicken nuggets part. But yes, I've been there with 3 toddlers having 3 now grown daughters. I understand that.
Yeah, I think my daughter might be like 40% chicken nugget at this point. We're in that phase.
I never grew up from that phase. So I'm still a chicken
Nice.
nugget French fry girl. I know.
Okay, so you heard it here. If we're taking you out to dinner, Deborah, then like good is chicken nuggets, right? It's
Yeah, like
different.
good old cheeseburger, like nothing too fancy, because we don't have a super sophisticated palate. But what this reminds me of, Todd, is what we heard quite a bit with Phil, is to never insert content without context. And, this just proved that to be true. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Phil
Well,
and
we're
I
talking
have a
about
lot
Phil
of
Jones. For those of you who don't know, and he's the co-collaborator. Is he co-author? What's his official title on the Prove It book?
yeah, he's the co-author.
And I interrupt you, Melanie, you were about to say something.
I was just going to say Phil and I are on the same page about a lot of these things. So the content, without context is probably something we've said to each other many times.
All right, so you've got those 2 books over your shoulder for those of you who are watching or listening to know. So your other book, so we talked about Prove It for a minute. Your other book is called Content Fuel Framework. Can you speak a little bit about who that book is for and why they might want to pick it up?
Yeah, so Content Fuel Framework is an extremely practical book. So it's not something that's going to give you a bunch of story. It's not a bunch of fluff. It's really sharing my system step by step of how I come up with content ideas, so that if you're feeling some version of I don't know what to post. I feel like I'm saying the same thing over again, and you need a repeatable process to kind of generate new ideas, then that's the Content Fuel framework kind of in a nutshell. It's going to walk you through how to do that and give you this reliable system that you can use over and over to come up with new content ideas. And it was really born out of workshops that I was doing. So I was teaching this in workshops, corporate workshops, at events, and there was always like well, do you have like a follow, like, is there something we can hold to kind of come back to this? And so I thought, well, I'll put in a book. I'll make it, as accessible as I can. So hopefully it kind of gives you access to, what a big corporation might be hiring for a workshop. You can get that same info in the book.
All right, I
Hey
love it.
guys, so you have it's called Content Fuel Framework. It's your way of never running out of ideas. And I believe, you were in journalism at the start, and when you're a journalist, you're writing like hundreds
All
of
the
pieces of
time.
content every day. And it's still
Yeah.
for a specific audience or
Mhm.
niche. It's not like it's just you can write about anything that you want, but it's like, that's hardcore.
Yeah. Well, and so that's kind of the funny thing, right? Like I came into the marketing world from journalism. And so it was a little bit mind-boggling to me when I realized that a lot of folks in the marketing and sales space felt like, well, like stories are a limited resource. There's only so many stories out there. There's only so many things you can say, because what we were taught in journalism is the total opposite. Like you'll never learn all the things there are to learn, and there's always more out there. There's always a good story that you haven't found yet. So I kind of was trying to reverse engineer, like, well, what's happening in my brain that allows me to never feel never feel like they're a scarce resource. And it's because I kind of realized this system is what I was relying on, kind of running down a checklist of different options and always finding a way to have a new combination.
Well, and that just made a light bulb go off for me, where a lot of times I tell clients, every loan app is a story. There's a problem or a perceived problem that you can help
Yes.
solve. So look back at, the last 7 days or even this weekend. Who is someone who has applied? That's a story. Who's someone who's made an offer on a home, and whether it got accepted or not, that's a story. Who went under contract? Who closed? Who is fighting their property tax battle? Like all of these are stories that we hear every day, but I think we just get so used to our day to day, and we've heard the story on, rinse and repeat
Yeah.
based off the profession that they're in, but it's like not your audience and others who, could be a marketer or could be a productivity coach. They haven't heard the same story or problem that, you sharing it could just make someone else be like, oh, that's my sister. Maybe I
Yeah.
should share this with my sister because she's also going through X, Y, and Z, and maybe this could help her.
Well, and that's the thing about stories, right? And why they're so special is we see ourselves and others in stories. When you talk about stats and facts, nobody's going to be like, "Oh yeah, my sister is that third bar from the left in the bar chart." Like that doesn't happen, right?
So
When you're
true.
sharing a story, and you say, "Oh, this person is a single mom." Like, I know a single mom, or, "Oh, this person's an entrepreneur." I know an entrepreneur. I know our good friend Phil says, "Do you think you might perhaps know someone just like you?" Right? So by giving people a person or people to relate to, you have that opportunity for them to see themselves or someone else in your content. And that's where that referral chain starts happening.
I love that whole idea of the storytelling allows people to think about who it is that fits in that narrative as well. We're hearing a lot, it seems to be the number one hot topic is AI, and how it's going to replace all of our brains and we're not going to need to do anything. What's your thought about that in content marketing going forward?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts, but specific to
Tell
what
us,
would
Them
girl.
be,
all.
Yeah.
I could talk about it all day. I think that AI is and can be an incredibly useful tool for efficiency, for productivity, and for saving time. Using it to do research, you can ask it to come up with content ideas for you. You can ask it for stats on a certain subject so that you have some data to corroborate your stories. It can essentially be a very efficient intern, is how I like to think of it from a content creation perspective. What it can't do is tell a story, right? And it can tell a made up story. You can ask it to make up a bedtime story about loan officers, and I'm sure it would be able to do it. But it can't know about Susan that you helped 3 weeks ago, who was going through this tough personal time, who was dealing with a health issue, who you managed to support through this really difficult time, and who is now, solved problem XYZ. Because ChatGPT can't do that. AI can't do that. So if you want to stand out and you want to have content that's differentiated, you need to lean into that human side. You need to lean into the stories, the emotions, the experiences, because at least so far, that's not something that AI can fabricate for us.
All right. So you said they're a very efficient intern. Is there some way or some question that you think someone could ask that would help them along there? Certainly, you're right. It's not going to tell that story, but is there some way that someone can use it in your mind when they're trying to create content?
Oh yeah, 100%. So one of my favorite things to do when I'm creating content is to ask. I use ChatGPT, but there's lots of tools out there that are generative AI, to ask it if I'm missing anything. So for example, I came up with a list of, like, in this case, let's say 10 questions to ask before choosing a loan officer. And then you paste that in there and you say, have I missed any key considerations in this list? And it can come back by searching all the content on the web and say, hey, it looks like you haven't mentioned anything about family situation, and that certain kinds of officers might be better for married couples versus single people. I don't know. I'm making this up entirely. But it will kind of surface things that you may have missed based on the meta conversation that's happening across, the breadth of the web. So identifying gaps in your thinking, identifying things you may have forgotten is a really good place to go. I would never let Chat GPT or another similar tool give you content or strategy that you would then just use wholesale, but it can be really useful to get help with brainstorming. Say, hey, I'm sick of direct mail. Do you have any, interesting marketing ideas for someone with a business like mine? And kind of discuss, who your target is and what you're trying to do. And maybe it would say, hey, you've probably never thought of this, but plumbers are very successful by using this random tactic. And maybe you could try something like that. So kind of just thinking outside the box, getting extra brain power on things is a really good thing to do. Or ask it to generate a list of ideas, and you can kind of massage it and go from there.
What do you think about just the future of creating content? Like, I look back and think just of the evolution of a lot of marketing and advertising with, before there were agencies that would regulate things that were said, and the whole, here's a bold hook of like, take this pill and lose 100 pounds in 5 minutes. And then,
Yeah.
so like people naturally distrust marketing. And I
Mhm.
made a post recently that the best call to action is skip ad, because everybody's always like, no one wants to be marketed to,
Mhm.
but with Chat GPT and the how quickly it can answer just the common questions, do you see that? And let me rewind there, because with TikTok and during COVID and how just consumer behavior changed just through something like TikTok of wanting
Mhm.
instant, like no fluff, get to the point. Do you see a pivot in where content creation may need to go, where it's addressing more of the things that like a Chat GPT can't answer?
Yeah, so I
Mhm.
think that's where, like, those human stories and, like, leaning into emotion comes in, right? Because again, as we've said, ChatGPT or another tool can come up with a list of 10 questions to ask, but it doesn't have an anecdote about a real client that matches for each of those. It doesn't have a story at the beginning about why you got into this business and how you want to help people, and that's why you're creating this piece of content. In a weird way, if you think about your experience of getting recipes online, you know how you go to get a recipe and it's always like 10 scrolls down the page because we first have to read the origin story of, like, how they went tomato picking with their grandfather when they were a child, and, like, now they have a farm and this whole thing, right? In a weird way, that is going to be what sets us apart from AI generated content in the long term, because
Mhm.
those human stories, those memories, those emotions, that relatability of human stories is going to be what allows us to stand out. And your unique voice and the way you talk about these things is going to be what makes it uniquely yours. And that's honestly, that's why it's so important to be thinking about these things and focusing on these things, to say, what am I doing that a robot can't do? What am I doing that AI can't do? And how do I make sure that that's front and center? Because that's what sets me apart.
So if you guys are worried about a robot taking your job, then your competitive advantage, guys, is, guess what? Just be a good human. Just
Hmm.
focus on human connection, empathy, emotional intelligence, all the things that robots can't do. There you
That's
go.
right. At least not yet.
Right. That's the secret, guys. Okay, so what about personal brand? Like, I get asked this all the time, like, how many personal posts should I mix in between my, business related posts? Do I need a personal brand? Should I have those accounts be separate? What are your thoughts on that?
So a couple things to consider. I think there's not one right answer for everybody. I think the first thing you need to consider is how much time, effort, and bandwidth you genuinely have to be managing social accounts, because for most of us, doing double the work is not super appealing. So kind of keeping those things in the same place, or choosing certain networks. For example, I'm professional me on LinkedIn and I'm professional me on Twitter, but when I'm on Facebook, I only connect with my friends, or maybe it's vice versa, right? Figuring out where you want to be those things, because running double the accounts is like a lot of work. And then you feel like you have split personalities and you got to figure out where to post things. It can get really stressful. On the other hand, acknowledging that there are some very legitimate concerns around privacy, safety, a number of other things. I have a young one, so I try not to put her face on social media too much. It's not her call if she wants to be posted everywhere, right? So you may have similar considerations. If you have young kids at home, you may not want to show where you live because it feels like a safety issue. So if you are kind of trying to walk that fine line, there can be value in keeping your business persona sort of like a separate entity. But again, I'd always advocate for figuring out the most reasonable answer and going from there, because I think to set up and start, now I have a business Facebook, a business LinkedIn, I've got a business account. You got 10 different accounts that you now have to manage and create content for. You're going to burn out. You're not going to successfully do that. So starting with what's realistic and scaling up as you're able to would be my recommendation there. As far as like a personal brand in general, I think it can be incredibly valuable, right? And especially in a relationships business where you rely heavily on referrals, like you want to be memorable. You want people to remember you. If you have a certain niche that you serve, you want to be associated with that. So they say, oh yeah, you're the whatever gal, right? You're the whatever guy. They know that you're the one to go to. But I think there's ways you can do that don't involve having to construct like a whole separate online persona. For me, we talked about this earlier, right? Like part of the reason that I show up often exactly as I am on a given day is because I don't have the energy to be two people, and I want to be able to show up for my audience at the drop of a hat, right? So for me, keeping those brands together and talking about like the ridiculous thing my toddler said right alongside some content strategy advice is just how I roll. But I do think like an 80-20 balance, if you're looking for just like general advice. Again, advice is always, take it with a grain of salt. But if you want people to follow you, then you want to give them a reason to follow you. And that means that most of the content should be serving them and not just serving you.
Well, and I would throw in a quick side plug. If you need extra help with content, you loan officers, we got Deborah Byrd, Plug and Play SM. Certainly makes my life easier. And I always love it because my kids are like, okay, Dad, was that your post? And then ironically, it's not always my post that they're thinking is really my post. So always does a
You've
great
nailed the
job.
voice. Yeah, you've nailed the voice, right? And that's why I think it's also important to get help, right? We talked earlier about, oftentimes the folks we're looking at who are killing it, like they have an agency, they have a VA, they have an intern or a full-time staffer handling social media. So getting help is a great way to make sure you don't burn out and you don't sort of fall short of those social media goals, for sure.
Well, and that's something that when I founded the company, I thought, how do I help loan officers protect the highest trust building activities possible that also generate the most revenue? Where if you could leverage out, just editing the content, creating the thumbnails, having the ideas. Like every Friday, I actually give my clients their roadmap for the following week, where I break down Monday through Friday. Like, here's how to go find your stories. Um, just to help remove the friction of just not having time, or I don't know what to post or what's relevant. They
Yeah.
basically have me in their hip pocket that's consuming hours of content to then say, okay, here was an article that was just written, like go do a green screen reel and talk about this and give your expert opinion, which doesn't mean perfect opinion, just expert opinion around, what CPI numbers were just released or, whatnot. So I do agree. I think it's important for people to know that a lot of the big producers that you see online that have great brands, the secret is they don't do it all themselves. They couldn't possibly do the production that they do, wearing all the multiple hats that it takes to run a mortgage or real estate team and all the content creation of just reading your insights and analytics. Am I posting at the right time on each platform? Et cetera, et cetera. So it is important, and we are available. So those of you who want more information, just go to our website, plugandplaysm.com. But Todd, I'm going to throw it back to you. What question have I not asked that you think would be, I know we have about 10 more minutes left. Is there anything that I have missed? I do have one more that may take a little bit of time for her to explain. So I want to make sure we give you more time.
No, that's perfect. You jump in with
Okay.
yours, because I
Okay.
have another question which isn't nearly as important as that one, I'm sure.
Well, so I'm thinking, I mean, you're the master with just storytelling, and I'm curious if you have a framework or a formula that would be easy for people to remember of what makes a good story, like from beginning to end, and how could they get better at telling stories?
So this is such an interesting question because there's a lot of different frameworks that you can call on. And maybe I should have a favorite, but I don't.
Mm.
And that's probably a horrible answer. But the reason for that is similar to the prescription thing we were talking about before, is that I think different structures can work for different audiences and different purposes. Like the how we tell a story from beginning to end for a Super Bowl commercial is very different than how you do the first episode of Game of Thrones or the last episode of Game of Thrones, right? So I think there's a lot of models out there that can be really helpful. Some that I know people are really drawn to is you can look at like the 3-act structure that we learned back in like high school English or theater or something like that, right? Where you have like the conflict, the resolution, all those different things. So that sort of 3-act structure is something you can look at. There's also something called Story Brand by a guy named Donald Miller that gives some
Mhm.
great sort of holistic your brand story advice as well. Tamsin Webster has something called the Red Thread, which is also a really solid system framework for organizing your ideas and help making sure that the tension of a story and what's at stake is really emphasized in a way that makes it compelling. So those are some of my favorites to turn to, but I don't think there's a wrong way to do it, right? Because again, I think about like the way you tell a scary story around a campfire doesn't fit most of those things, right? But it still is compelling in that context. I think it's more about identifying up front, like what do I want people to know at the end of this story? What do I want them to feel while I'm telling it or at the end? And then saying, okay, now what order should I present that information to help create that feeling, that effect?
Well, and I just want to echo something that you said earlier, which is you don't always have to be your own storyteller. Like perhaps if we planted the seeds along the way with our clients, I mean, you'd be surprised of how many millennials and Gen Zs are about to buy homes that you ask them to whip out a video of, sharing their process or experience, or videotape your dog running through the backyard for the first time where he's sniffing every little, piece of grass like that. You ask them to do that, and it's gonna be with trending audio and with captions because 'cause they're like mini content creators because 'cause they've just been raised with an
Yeah,
iPad in their hand since birth, and so, don't be scared to ask for that from certain clients where it makes sense and where it could be a value where they tag you in a post, and now your future
even
marketing
better.
department is your clients sharing their experiences. That's like an ultimate prove it, um, you are who you say you are and you do what you say you're going to do. It's like there's so much more credibility when it comes from actual clients that you didn't pay. Sometimes when
Yes.
it's like super polished, people are like, it's almost
Hang
like
on a
perfect
second. Yeah.
5-star reviews. You're like, are those all
Yes.
family members? Like,
So that's exactly right. So that's one of the things that I think is really important to remember when if you're feeling any sort of like imposter syndrome, it has to be perfect. The data shows that people trust 4.8 and 4.9 star reviews more than they trust 5-star reviews for exactly that reason, because nobody is perfect. No business gets it right 100% of the time. And if I don't see the instances of you getting it wrong or making a mistake or someone not being happy, I think you're suppressing that. I think you're hiding the bad, and that's way less trustworthy. So don't be afraid to be human, to make a mistake, to, just be yourself. The other example I like to give, if it's helpful, is like, remember when you were a freshman in high school and the seniors were like the coolest people on earth and you thought they knew everything and they had it all together. And then you got to be a senior and realized you didn't know everything and you didn't have it all together. you still only need to be a few steps ahead to provide value to your audience. You don't have to know everything. You don't have to be the best in the world at what you do. You just need to be able to help them get to their desired result. So you don't have to know everything. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be able to help them.
I love that. I love that. So if Phil was here, what question would he think that we forgot to ask you, or that he would want you to tell us that we didn't actually discuss yet?
Oh, that's a good question. It's like
I mean,
meta.
he's the master question asker and
He is.
creator. That's a tough one, Todd.
He is. That is a tough one.
I mean, you spent hours with him at different coffee shops, right? Like when
oh
you
yeah,
were,
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. So, I mean, really blessed to have Phil as a friend. We've been friends for many years. You know, he came to my wedding. Our girls were born right around the same time. So, you know, before we have each moved all over the place, we used to live like 10 minutes apart. So, yeah, it's tough to get inside of his head. But I would say what Phil's really good at doing is asking. And so I'm asking the audience this question: what are you going to do to turn this into action? Because if you listen to this podcast, you hear all of these ideas and you do nothing, you have not really learned. So make the step right now that you're going to ask your audience what they want to hear about, that you're going to look for opportunities to capture all of this in your day-to-day life, that you're going to do an audit of your claims of your materials so you know what kind of proof you need to be creating, and that you're going to make a realistic plan so you don't burn yourself out. You're going to get support where you need it so that you can actually turn what you're hearing here today into change that's going to benefit your business.
All right, mic drop. I mean, that's normally my job is telling everyone to take action, and you just crushed it. So
I should have done it with a British accent. Missed opportunity.
No, that was fabulous. That was fabulous. So the Content Fuel Framework, Prove It, are your two books. You've got your new
Creator Kitchen.
Creator Kitchen.
Darn it. I was going to remember that. I was trying to flip back over there and look at it. Who is that for, just as kind of a last minute plug for you?
For sure. Yeah. So the Creator Kitchen is essentially a membership where we have conversations like this all the time. We're talking about how to create better content, how to build a body of creative work. So if you are the kind of person who has a podcast, who has a newsletter, who's writing a book or wants to write a book, then the Creator Kitchen is a membership that might be a good fit for you for accountability and just continued creative growth.
Check, check, check.
I was going to say, right, Deborah and I, like, all right, we're going to race. Who's going to sign up first?
Yeah.
Well, I will share too. If anyone does want to join, feel free to reach out. Happy to answer questions about it. But you can use the code I'm with Mel. So I'm with Mel, all one word, all caps, and you could save $100. So if you do decide to join, at least you do it a little bit cheaper.
And that's $100
now, is there
for life.
Yes, for life.
Is there an apostrophe with I'm with Mel?
No, just
No, okay.
IMWITHMEL.
Oh.
That is awesome. That is awesome. So I normally give the action plan. What my action plan is rewind it about 2 minutes and listen to Melanie's action plan. That was fabulous. I would encourage you all to make sure that you're following Melanie. She's got such a unique history. I would certainly encourage the book. I listened. It was easy for me to listen that way. Plus you get to hear her and Phil with his cool British accent. I'll let you close it out, Deborah Byrd.
Well, and I listened to it and read it at the same time because I'm one of those that I need auditory and the like underlining and highlighting. And so I want to challenge everyone listening and just say, prove it. You know, I get to speak to a lot of you. We do discovery calls. I ask you what separates you from your competition. And I always say, don't give me like your exact pitch, but whatever those core 3 things are, I want you to go back and look for the evidence of you actually doing those things, and maybe even take it one step further of what you say you do. Now go look at your reviews, your online testimonials. Are those in alignment? Are they using the same terminology as what you think that you do for people? And if you need to make some adjustments, know that, like Phil says, it's always better. It's a work in progress. We never reach best or mastery. So, you know, don't beat yourself up about it, but either make the adjustments you need to make so that you are living in truth and actually doing what you say you will do. Because, you know, there's some keyboard warriors out there, guys. You can say you do certain things, and you better believe there's going to be someone out there now where they can make their own post or comment on one of your posts or write their own nasty reviews. So, you know, let's just all be better students of our craft. Let's study our game and let's share the little bits that we learn, and let's prove why we're the experts and why our advice makes a difference. So that's all I got, Todd.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Melanie. We really appreciate you spending time with us and our community. And we look forward to learning more, continuing to study what you put out there. And thanks again.
Thanks for having me and letting me share my story.
All right. Take care,
Thank
everyone.
you.
We'll see
Appreciate
in the
it.
next episode of Win Now.